Sometimes it takes losing everything to discover what truly matters. Sometimes the very people we hurt become the ones who save us when we need it most. Jason Harwood was a successful CEO who thought he had it all figured out. He built his company by stepping on others and never looked back. But on a mountain road in Colorado, someone tried to kill him. His brakes were cut and his car caught fire after the crash. He should have died that night. Instead, a golden retriever pulled him from the wreckage and led him to safety. As Jason follows this dog through the wilderness, he finds an old cabin filled with photographs, pictures from his company's early days, faces of people he destroyed on his way to the top. The dog once belonged to someone whose life Jason ruined years ago. But why is this dog helping the man who destroyed everything his owner held dear? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fire was dying down when Jason Harwood first opened his eyes. Smoke still curled from the twisted metal that had been his BMW, a black skeleton against the Colorado mountainside. Every breath felt like swallowing glass, and his left shoulder screamed with each movement. But he was alive, and that shouldn't have been possible. The golden retriever sat 3 feet away, watching him with intelligent brown eyes. Blood matted the fur around the dog's mouth, his blood. Jason realized from where the animal had dragged him clear of the wreckage. The dog's tail gave a tentative wag when Jason tried to sit up. "Easy there, boy," Jason whispered, his voice hoarse from smoke. The dog's ears perked forward, but it maintained its careful distance. Jason's mind felt foggy, struggling to piece together the events that had led him here. He'd been driving back from the merger meeting in Denver, taking the scenic route through the mountains as he always did when he needed to think. The call had come in just as he'd reached the winding section of Highway 285, his assistant, Margaret's voice tight with something that might have been fear. "Mr. Harwood, you need to get back to the office immediately. There's been a development with the Brennan acquisition." He'd been pushing the BMW harder than usual, his mind racing through the implications. The Brennan deal was supposed to be his masterpiece, the acquisition that would cement Harwood Technologies as the dominant force in cybersecurity. 3 years of careful maneuvering, of identifying weaknesses in smaller competitors and exploiting them ruthlessly. Then the brakes had failed. Jason closed his eyes, remembering the sickening moment when the pedal had gone soft under his foot. He'd pumped frantically, but the car had only gained speed on the downhill grade. The guardrail had been no match for 4,300 pounds of German engineering at 70 miles per hour. The golden retriever whined softly, drawing Jason back to the present. The dog was older than he'd first thought, with gray around its muzzle and a slight stiffness in its movements. But its eyes held a keenness that spoke of intelligence and purpose. "Where did you come from?" Jason asked, extending his hand slowly. The dog sniffed cautiously before allowing Jason to touch its head. A collar was hidden beneath the thick fur leather, worn smooth with age. Jason had built his empire on reading situations quickly, on seeing opportunities where others saw obstacles. At 38, he commanded a company worth $800 million, employed over 4,000 people across 12 countries, and had a reputation for ruthless efficiency that made competitors nervous and investors ecstatic. He'd started Harwood Technologies 15 years ago with Marcus Webb, his former roommate from MIT. They'd had complementary skills. Jason understood markets and people, while Marcus was the technical genius who could make their security software sing. In the early days, they worked 18-hour days in a converted garage, surviving on pizza and the shared dream of changing how the world thought about cybersecurity. The partnership had lasted exactly 2 years. Jason pushed the memory away, focusing on his immediate situation. His phone was somewhere in the wreckage, probably melted. His wallet was in his jacket pocket, credit cards warped but intact. The golden retriever continued to watch him with that unsettling intelligence. "Okay, boy. I guess it's you and me." Jason struggled to his feet, wincing as his ribs protested. The dog immediately stood as well, tail wagging more enthusiastically. The crash site was on a rarely traveled stretch of mountain road, hidden from view by a stand of pine trees. No one would find him here by accident. The nearest town was probably 20 miles away, and Jason wasn't sure he could make that distance on foot with his injuries. But the dog seemed to have other ideas. It trotted a few yards away from the wreckage, then stopped and looked back at Jason expectantly. When Jason didn't move, the dog returned and gently took Jason's sleeve in its mouth, tugging toward a narrow trail that led into the woods. "You want me to follow you?" Jason asked. The dog's tail wagged harder, against his better judgment. Jason found himself stumbling after the golden retriever into the wilderness. The trail was barely visible, winding between massive pines and over granite outcroppings. The dog moved with the confidence of familiarity, occasionally stopping to ensure Jason was keeping up as they walked. Jason's mind drifted to the phone call that had summoned him back to Denver. Margaret had sounded genuinely frightened, which was unusual for his normally unflappable assistant. She'd been with the company for 8 years, had seen him navigate hostile takeovers and corporate espionage attempts without breaking stride. What could have spooked her so badly? The Brennan acquisition was supposed to be straightforward. Brennan Security Solutions was a small firm specializing in financial sector cybersecurity, with some promising patents and a client list that included 3 major banks. Their CEO, David Brennan, had been resistant to Jason's initial overtures, but financial pressure had a way of changing minds. Jason had orchestrated that pressure carefully. A few strategic leaks to industry publications about Brennan's outdated technology. Some pointed questions from regulatory bodies about their compliance protocols. And suddenly, Brennan's clients were reconsidering their contracts. Within 6 months, David Brennan was facing bankruptcy. It was a strategy Jason had perfected over the years. Identify promising small companies, weaken them systematically, then acquire them at a fraction of their true value. He called it competitive optimization. His lawyers called it aggressive but legal business practices. His victims had other names for it. The golden retriever led him deeper into the forest, following a trail that showed signs of regular use. Someone maintained this path, cleared the fallen branches, and marked the route with subtle blazes on tree trunks. After what felt like an hour of walking, the dog stopped at a small clearing where a log cabin sat nestled among towering pines. The cabin was rustic but well-maintained, with a stone chimney and windows that reflected the late afternoon sun. Solar panels on the roof suggested modern amenities despite the isolated location. The golden retriever trotted up to the front door and sat, tail wagging as it looked back at Jason. "This is your home?" Jason asked. The dog barked once, a sound that seemed to convey affirmation. Jason approached the cabin cautiously. The front door was unlocked, and the golden retriever pushed it open with its nose, leading Jason inside. The interior was cozy but sparse. Living area with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and what appeared to be 2 bedrooms. Everything was clean and organized, as if the owner had just stepped out, but it was the photographs covering one wall that made Jason's blood run cold. Dozens of pictures were arranged in a careful grid, some in frames, others simply pinned to the wood. Jason recognized the faces immediately: former business partners, employees he'd fired, competitors he'd driven out of business. The photos spanned years, from the early days of Harwood Technologies to recent corporate events. In the center of the display was a larger photograph that Jason remembered posing for himself and Marcus Webb at the signing ceremony for their first major contract. They'd been so young, so hopeful. Marcus was grinning widely, his arm around Jason's shoulders. Jason's own smile looked predatory, even. Then, below the photographs, someone had written names and dates in careful handwriting. Next to Marcus Webb's picture, the notation read, "Partnership dissolved 2011. Company assets transferred to JH. Personal bankruptcy filed 2012. Lost family home, 2013. Jason sank into a wooden chair, his legs suddenly unsteady. The golden retriever padded over and rested its head on Jason's knee. Brown eyes filled with something that might have been sympathy. "Who lives here?" Jason whispered to the dog. "Who's been watching me?" The dog's only response was to press closer, offering silent comfort to the man whose life he'd saved. Outside, the Colorado wilderness settled into evening quiet, and Jason Harwood began to understand that his survival might not have been the stroke of luck he'd initially believed. Jason spent his first night in the cabin cleaning his wounds and trying to make sense of what he'd discovered. The golden retriever stayed close, occasionally bringing him supplies, a first aid kit from under the kitchen sink, a bottle of water from the refrigerator, even a blanket from one of the bedrooms. The dog's behavior suggested intelligence beyond normal canine instincts. As dawn light filtered through the cabin windows, Jason found himself studying the photograph wall more carefully. The images weren't random. They told a story of systematic destruction spanning his entire career. Each face represented a life he'd appended in his climb to the top. Sarah Martinez, who'd started a promising security consulting firm that competed with one of Jason's early contracts. He'd undercut her pricing until she couldn't sustain operations, then hired away her key employees. Rebecca Collins, a former Harwood Technologies engineer, who tried to start her own company using skills she'd developed on Jason's payroll. A few strategic patent challenges and accusations of corporate espionage had ended her entrepreneurial dreams. The golden retriever padded over to Jason, carrying something in its mouth, a collar, leather worn smooth with age. Jason took it gently, examining the brass nameplate that had been hidden beneath the dog's thick fur. "Charlie," he read aloud. Below the name was an address in Boulder, Colorado, and a phone number. Jason's hands trembled as he turned the collar over. Etched into the back in smaller letters were the words, "Beloved companion of Marcus Webb." The name hit Jason like a physical blow. Marcus Webb, his former partner, the man whose technical genius had built the foundation of Harwood Technologies. The same Marcus Webb whose photograph held the place of honor in the center of the wall. Jason closed his eyes, memories flooding back with painful clarity. Marcus had been more than a business partner in those early days. He'd been Jason's closest friend, the brother Jason had never had. They'd met as freshmen at MIT, two kids from working-class families who'd earned their way into the most prestigious technology program in the world. Marcus had been brilliant but naive, more interested in the elegant beauty of code than the harsh realities of business. He trusted Jason completely, signing over 51% of the company to ensure Jason could make the tough decisions that would drive their success. Jason had made those decisions all right. When Brennan Industries had approached them with a buyout offer worth $12 million, Marcus had wanted to refuse. "We're just getting started," he'd argued. "Give us 5 more years, and we'll be worth 10 times that." But Jason had seen an opportunity. Instead of selling to Brennan, he'd negotiated a licensing deal that gave Harwood Technologies access to Brennan's client base while maintaining their independence. What Marcus didn't know was that Jason had secretly negotiated a separate agreement, one that gave him personal control over the licensing revenue and positioned him to eventually buy out Marcus's share of the company. The betrayal had been surgical in its precision. Jason had used Marcus's own trust against him, manipulating board meetings and financial reports until Marcus found himself voted out of his own company. By the time Marcus realized what was happening, Jason owned 80% of Harwood Technologies and had the legal right to terminate Marcus's employment. Charlie whined softly, bringing Jason back to the present. The dog was sitting beside, A desk Jason hadn't noticed the night before. A simple wooden table covered with papers and manila folders. On top of the stack was an official-looking document with a veterinary clinic's letterhead. Jason picked up the paper, his hand shaking as he read. It was Charlie's medical records, dated 18 months ago. The dog's owner was listed as Marcus Webb, with an address in Denver. But what made Jason's blood run cold was the notation at the bottom. Patient deceased as of March 2023. Dog surrendered to Denver Animal Rescue. March 2023. Jason had been in Europe then, closing the deal that had made Harwood Technologies the third largest cybersecurity firm in North America. He'd been celebrating his success in a 5-star London hotel while Marcus Webb was dying. The cabin suddenly felt suffocating. Jason stumbled outside, Charlie following closely behind. The morning air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and the distant sound of running water. But Jason could barely breathe as the full implications of his discovery crashed over him. Marcus was dead, and Charlie had somehow made his way to this remote cabin. The photographs inside weren't just a collection of Jason's victims. They were evidence of investigation. Someone had been documenting Jason's rise to power, cataloging each life he destroyed along the way. But who? And why had Charlie rescued him from the wreckage instead of leaving him to die? Jason found a trail leading away from the cabin, marked by the same subtle blazes he'd followed the day before. Charlie trotted ahead confidently, occasionally looking back to ensure Jason was following. After 20 minutes of walking, they emerged at a small clearing where a second structure sat hidden among the trees. This building was more workshop than cabin, with large windows and what appeared to be sophisticated electronics visible through the glass. Solar panels covered the entire roof, and Jason could hear the hum of generators and cooling systems. Charlie scratched at the front door, whimpering softly. The door was locked, but Jason found a key hidden under a fake rock near the entrance. Inside, he discovered what could only be described as a command center. Multiple computer monitors lined one wall, their screens dark but clearly sophisticated. Filing cabinets filled with meticulously organized folders. And on a corkboard covering the far wall, a detailed timeline of Jason's business activities. Spanning the past 15 years. At the center of the timeline was a photograph Jason had never seen before. Marcus Webb in a hospital bed, gaunt and pale but smiling weakly as Charlie lay beside him on the narrow mattress. Below the photo, someone had written in Marcus's familiar handwriting, "Charlie, take care of our friend when the time comes. He'll need guidance more than he knows." Jason's legs gave out, and he collapsed into a desk chair. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus had orchestrated this entire situation. The cabin, the photographs, even Charlie's presence at the crash site. But why would Marcus want to save the man who destroyed his life? A manila folder labeled J.H. Final Phase sat open on the desk. Inside were detailed plans and preparations, written in Marcus's careful script. The first page made Jason's blood run cold. Jason will come here when he has nowhere else to turn. Charlie will guide him, as Charlie has always been the best judge of character between the two of us. The evidence I've gathered isn't for revenge. It's to show Jason who he really became, and to give him the chance to choose who he wants to be. Below that, a list of names and addresses, all the people Jason had wronged over the years, along with notes about their current situations. Some had recovered and rebuilt their lives. Others hadn't been so fortunate. At the bottom of the page, Marcus had written one final note. The brakes will fail on Highway 285. Mile marker 127. Charlie knows the way home. Everything Jason needs to become the man I always believed he could be is here waiting for him. The choice, as always, will be his. Jason's hands shook as he read the words again. Marcus had known about the brake failure. He'd orchestrated not Just Jason's survival, but his entire journey to this moment. But that meant someone else was involved. Someone who tampered with Jason's car and ensured he'd be on that specific stretch of road at exactly the right time. Charlie pressed against Jason's legs, offering comfort that Jason didn't deserve. The dog's loyalty to Marcus was absolute, even extending to the man who destroyed his master's life. It was a grace Jason had never shown anyone else. Outside, storm clouds were gathering over the Colorado peaks. Jason could hear thunder in the distance, and the first drops of rain began patting against the workshop windows. He was trapped now, not just by the weather, but by the weight of 15 years' worth of choices. For the first time in his adult life, Jason Harwood was forced to confront the truth about who he'd become. And somewhere in the mountain wilderness, with only a golden retriever for company, he would have to decide if it was too late to change. The storm lasted 3 days, trapping Jason and Charlie in the mountain workshop while rain hammered the roof and wind howled through the pines. Jason used the forced isolation to explore Marcus's research, and what he discovered made him sick to his stomach. Marcus hadn't just documented Jason's business practices. He'd traced the human cost of every decision, every merger, every hostile takeover. The filing cabinets contained detailed dossiers on dozens of people whose lives had been upended by Jason's ambition. Sarah Martinez had lost her home and declared personal bankruptcy 6 months after Jason destroyed her consulting firm. She'd been forced to move back in with her parents at age 35. Her confidence so shattered that she'd taken a minimum wage job rather than risk starting another business. Rebecca Collins had been even less fortunate. The patent challenges and corporate espionage accusations had made her unemployable in the tech industry. She'd moved to rural Montana and worked as a substitute teacher, her engineering career effectively over. The last entry in her file was a newspaper clipping about a drunk driving arrest, her first and only brush with the law. 2 years after losing everything, Charlie seemed to sense Jason's growing distress, staying close and occasionally bringing him water or nudging him away from the files when his research became too intense. The dog's presence was oddly comforting, a steady reminder that Marcus had somehow anticipated even this moment. On the second day, Jason found Marcus's personal journal hidden in a locked drawer. The key was taped to the underside of Charlie's collar, another sign of Marcus's meticulous planning. The journal entries spanned 5 years, starting from Marcus's cancer diagnosis and documenting his growing obsession with Jason's business practices. "I used to tell myself that Jason was just ambitious," one entry read, "that the ruthlessness was necessary in a competitive industry. But I've been tracking the aftermath of his deals, and the human cost is staggering. How many families have been destroyed so Jason could add another zero to his net worth?" Another entry, dated 6 months before Marcus's death, was more personal. "Charlie doesn't understand why I spend so much time at the computer, but he stays with me anyway. Dogs are better at forgiveness than people. I wonder if Charlie could teach Jason something I never could." Jason set the journal down, unable to continue reading. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, but he felt more trapped than ever. Marcus had created an elaborate trap, using Jason's own guilt and Charlie's loyalty to force a confrontation with the truth. But there was still the question of who had tampered with Jason's brakes. Marcus's plans were detailed, but they required an accomplice, someone who could access Jason's car and ensure he'd be on that mountain road at precisely the right time. Jason found part of the answer in a folder labeled SW Implementation. Inside were photographs of a young woman with Marcus's dark eyes and determined expression. Sarah Webb, Marcus's daughter, age 26, currently employed as a senior mechanic at European Auto Specialists in Denver, the same shop that serviced Jason's BMW. The realization hit Jason like a physical blow. Marcus's daughter had been working on his car for years, had access to every system, every vulnerability. She could have tampered with the brake lines during any routine service appointment, timing the failure to coincide with Jason's predictable route home from Denver. More photographs showed Sarah at various locations around Denver, clearly conducting surveillance. She documented Jason's routines, his favorite restaurants, even his weekly visits to the same mountain highway when he needed to think. The planning had been meticulous and personal in a way that spoke to years of focused hatred. But if Sarah Webb wanted Jason dead, why had Charlie been positioned to save him? The contradiction made no sense unless Marcus's influence extended beyond the grave. Unless he'd convinced his daughter that redemption was more valuable than revenge. Jason spent the third day exploring the trail system around the cabin, Charlie serving as his guide. The dog led him to several supply caches hidden throughout the forest: food, water, basic medical supplies, even changes of clothing in Jason's size. Marcus had anticipated every detail of Jason's survival, preparing for a journey of unknown duration. The main trail connected to a network of hiking paths that eventually led back to civilization, but Charlie consistently steered Jason away from routes that would take them out of the mountains. The dog had a job to do, and it wouldn't be satisfied until that job was complete. On their longest hike, Charlie led Jason to a scenic overlook where someone had built a simple memorial, a pile of stones with a wooden cross bearing Marcus's name and dates. Fresh wildflowers had been placed recently, probably by Sarah, during one of her visits to maintain the cabin and workshop. Jason knelt beside the memorial, Charlie settling down beside him with a heavy sigh. The view stretched for miles across the Colorado wilderness, peaks and valleys extending to the horizon. It was the kind of place where a man could find peace if he was capable of accepting it. "I'm sorry," Jason whispered to the memorial. "I know it doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry." Charlie's tail thumped once against the ground, a sound that seemed to carry both acceptance and challenge. The dog's brown eyes held an intelligence that was almost human, and Jason found himself wondering how much Marcus had shared with his loyal companion. "You understand what he wanted from me, don't you?" Jason asked. "But I don't know how to be different. I've been this person for so long, I'm not sure there's anything else left." Charlie stood and walked to the edge of the overlook, looking back at Jason expectantly. The message was clear. The journey wasn't over yet. Marcus's plan required more than confession and apology. It demanded transformation, and that would require Jason to face not just his past mistakes, but the people he'd wronged. As they made their way back to the cabin, Jason's phone finally found a signal. Messages flooded in dozens of missed calls from his office, increasingly frantic voicemails from his assistant Margaret, and news alerts about his disappearance. The outside world was looking for him, but Jason wasn't ready to be found. One message stood out from the rest, sent from an unknown number with a Denver area code. "Charlie is a good judge of character. When you're ready to prove him right, you'll find me at the memorial on Sunday evenings. W." Sarah Webb was still in contact, still monitoring his progress through the elaborate maze her father had constructed. She held the keys to Jason's return to civilization, but those keys came with conditions he wasn't sure he could meet. That evening, as Jason sat by the fireplace with Charlie curled up beside him, he began to understand the true scope of Marcus's plan. This wasn't just about survival or even redemption. It was about resurrection. Marcus wanted Jason to die in that car crash, not physically but spiritually, so that someone better could take his place. The question was whether Jason had the courage to let that transformation happen, or if he would find some way to escape back to his old life and old ways. Charlie watched him with patient eyes, waiting to see which man Jason would choose to become. By the end of his first week in the mountains, Jason had established a routine that would have been unthinkable in his previous life. He woke with the sunrise, helped by Charlie's gentle nudging, and spent his mornings reading through Marcus's research files. Afternoons were devoted to hiking the trail system, with Charlie leading him to new locations that always seemed to serve a specific purpose. In Marcus's grand design, the files revealed the extent of Marcus's investigation into Harwood Technologies' business practices. It documented not just the companies Jason had destroyed, but the ripple effects that followed: employees who couldn't find new jobs, families that lost their homes, children whose college funds disappeared along with their parents' businesses. One file contained correspondence with law enforcement agencies, showing that Marcus had considered taking his evidence to the authorities. FBI agents had shown interest in some of Jason's more questionable acquisitions, particularly those involving foreign companies with potential national security implications. But Marcus had ultimately decided against formal prosecution, believing that legal consequences alone wouldn't address the deeper problem. Jason's real crime isn't against the law, Marcus had written in one journal entry. It's against the fundamental decency that should govern how we treat each other. Prison wouldn't teach him empathy. It would only make him more cunning about hiding his ruthlessness. Jason found himself wondering if Marcus was right. Would he have learned anything from a criminal conviction? Or would he have simply hired better lawyers and found more sophisticated ways to destroy his competitors? Charlie's behavior was becoming increasingly purposeful. The dog would lead Jason to specific locations, then sit and wait until Jason discovered what Marcus had hidden there: more files, photographs, or personal items that belonged to people Jason had wronged. Each discovery was carefully orchestrated to force Jason to confront another aspect of his past. On Thursday, Charlie led him to a cache hidden near a stream where Jason found a box of personal letters. They were addressed to Marcus from some of Jason's victims, people who had somehow tracked down Jason's former partner and sought answers about what had happened to their businesses. Sarah Martinez had written, "I know you weren't responsible for what happened to my company, but I hoped you might help me understand. I worked so hard to build something meaningful, and it vanished almost overnight. I just want to know why." David Brennan, whose company was currently in Jason's crosshairs, had sent a desperate plea. "I've heard rumors about Jason's methods, but I always assumed they were exaggerated. Now I'm facing the same systematic destruction that others have described. If there's any way to reason with him, any approach that might appeal to whatever decency remains, I would be grateful for guidance." Marcus had saved every letter, but apparently never responded to any of them. Instead, he'd used them to fuel his investigation and plan Jason's current predicament. Reading the pain and confusion in those letters, Jason began to understand why Marcus had chosen such an elaborate form of intervention. "You wanted me to feel what they felt," Jason said aloud, Charlie's ears perking up at the sound of his voice. Confused, betrayed, abandoned with no one to turn to for help. The parallel was uncomfortably precise. Jason was experiencing the same isolation and vulnerability that he'd inflicted on dozens of others. The difference was that he had Charlie and Marcus's carefully prepared resources, while his victims had faced their destruction alone. On Friday, Jason's phone caught another brief signal, and more messages poured in. His absence was becoming a major news story, with speculation ranging from suicide to foreign kidnapping. Harwood Technologies' stock price was plummeting, and the board of directors was reportedly considering emergency leadership changes. One voicemail from Margaret, his assistant, struck him as odd. "Mr. Harwood, I hope you're safe wherever you are. Please know that some of us are genuinely concerned about you personally, not just the company. There are things happening here that you need to know about when you're ready to return." Margaret had worked for Jason for 8 years, handling everything from schedule coordination to sensitive corporate intelligence. She'd seen him at his worst and had never shown signs of personal affection or concern beyond professional loyalty. Her message suggested something significant was happening at Harwood Technologies, something that went beyond normal operational concerns during a CEO's absence. Jason tried calling Margaret back, but the signal was too weak for voice communication. He managed to send a brief text. Safe. Need time. Trust no one with operational authority until I return. The response came immediately. Understood. Board meeting scheduled Monday to discuss succession planning. They're moving faster than expected. Jason stared at the phone screen as the implications sank in. His own board of directors was using his absence to stage some kind of corporate coup. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was experiencing the same kind of betrayal he'd inflicted on Marcus 15 years earlier. That evening, as Jason sat by the fireplace reading more of Marcus's journal entries, he found a section that seemed to address his current situation directly. I've been thinking about the nature of justice and whether it's possible for someone like Jason to truly change. I believe that transformation requires more than just understanding the harm you've caused. It requires accepting personal vulnerability and learning to trust others despite the risk of betrayal. Jason has spent his entire career avoiding vulnerability, using his power to ensure he could never be hurt the way he's hurt others. If this plan works, if Charlie can guide him to this place, Jason will experience true powerlessness for the first time in decades. He'll have to choose between the safe cynicism that served him so well and the dangerous hope that people can be better than their worst impulses. I hope he chooses hope. I hope he remembers the young man I once considered my brother. Jason closed the journal, his hands trembling slightly. Marcus had understood him better than Jason understood himself, had predicted not just his actions, but his emotional responses with uncanny accuracy. Even the timing of his board's potential betrayal seemed to fit into Marcus's larger plan. Charlie patted over and rested his head on Jason's knee, offering comfort that Jason was beginning to accept he needed. The dog's loyalty to Marcus extended to this mission of redemption, and Jason was starting to understand that rejecting that loyalty would mean rejecting his last chance at becoming a better person. Outside, another storm was building over the peaks. Jason could hear thunder in the distance and see lightning flickering behind the clouds. But for the first time since the crash, he wasn't afraid of being trapped. The wilderness was teaching him patience, and Marcus's presence, mediated through Charlie and the carefully prepared resources, was teaching him something even more valuable. He was learning how to be still long enough to listen to his own conscience, a voice he'd been drowning out with ambition and rationalizations for most of his adult life. And that voice was telling him things about himself that he'd never had the courage to hear. The transformation Marcus had envisioned was beginning, but Jason sensed it would demand even greater challenges before it was complete. Charlie seemed to understand this too, watching Jason with the patient determination of a guide who knew the hardest part of the journey was still ahead. Sunday evening found Jason standing at Marcus's memorial overlook, Charlie beside him as storm clouds gathered overhead. He'd been in the mountains for 10 days now, and the physical isolation was beginning to affect him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The constant silence, broken only by wind and wildlife, had stripped away the usual distractions that prevented self-reflection. At exactly 7 o'clock, Jason heard footsteps on the trail behind him. He turned to see a young woman emerging from the tree line, Marcus's daughter Sarah, though she looked nothing like the surveillance photos in her father's files. She was smaller than he'd expected, with calloused hands and practical hiking clothes that spoke to someone comfortable in the wilderness. Charlie's tail wagged furiously as Sarah approached, and she knelt to embrace the golden retriever with obvious affection. The reunion was touching in its simplicity. Two creatures who shared deep love for a man who was no longer alive to appreciate it. "He's been taking good care of you," Sarah said, her voice carrying Marcus's familiar cadence. She looked up at Jason with eyes that held a mixture of curiosity and carefully controlled anger. "Better care than you probably deserve." Jason had prepared for this confrontation during his days of isolation, But facing Marcus's daughter in person was more difficult than he'd imagined. She had her father's intelligence and intensity, but there was something harder in her expression, a cynicism that Marcus had never possessed. "Your father was a better man than I ever gave him credit for," Jason said finally. "I know that doesn't absolve me of what I did to him, but I need you to know that I understand what I took from your family." Sarah stood slowly, studying Jason's face with the careful attention of someone evaluating a potential threat. "My father spent the last 2 years of his life obsessed with you. Do you have any idea what that was like for me? Watching him pour his remaining energy into this elaborate plan instead of focusing on treatment or spending time with the people who loved him." The accusation hit Jason harder than he'd expected. He'd been so focused on his own guilt about destroying Marcus that he hadn't considered the secondary victims, the family members who'd lost not just Marcus's financial support, but his emotional presence during his final years. "I didn't know he was sick," Jason said. "If I had, you would have what?" Sarah interrupted. "Visited him in the hospital? Offered to pay for treatments? You had 15 years to reach out, to apologize, to make any kind of amends. You chose to pretend he didn't exist instead." Charlie whined softly, sensing the tension between the two humans. Sarah's hand dropped to the dog's head, her fingers automatically finding the spot behind his ears that Marcus had always favored. "He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in January 2021. Sarah continued, her voice becoming more controlled. "The doctors gave him 18 months. He used that time to research your business practices, to document every life you destroyed, and to plan this intervention. I begged him to focus on his health, to spend his remaining time with me and Charlie. But he was convinced that saving your soul was more important than saving his body." Jason felt the weight of that sacrifice settling over him like a physical burden. Marcus had literally given his life to create this opportunity for redemption, choosing to spend his final months on an elaborate plan to force Jason to confront his own moral bankruptcy. "Why did you help him?" Jason asked. "You could have refused to tamper with my car, could have let him die knowing his plan would never be implemented." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "You think I wanted to help you? I spent months trying to talk him out of this obsession. I wanted him to expose you publicly, to turn over his evidence to the FBI and let you face the consequences of your actions. But he insisted that punishment wouldn't change you, that you needed to experience the vulnerability and isolation you'd inflicted on others." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with documents. "These are the files he asked me to give you when he thought you were ready. Financial records, personal testimonies, legal analyses of your business practices. Everything he gathered during his investigation." Jason accepted the envelope with trembling hands. The weight of it seemed to represent the cumulative harm of his entire career, documented and organized by a man who'd once trusted him completely. "There's something else you need to understand," Sarah continued. "The brake failure wasn't supposed to be fatal. My father was very specific about that. I'm a certified automotive technician, and I know exactly how to create a gradual failure that would force you off the road without causing a high-speed collision. But someone else tampered with your car after I did." The revelation sent ice through Jason's veins. "Someone else?" "The brake lines I weakened should have given you plenty of warning grinding sounds. Soft pedal feel, gradual loss of stopping power. Instead, you experienced complete hydraulic failure at highway speed. Someone wanted you dead, and they used my sabotage as cover for attempted murder." Jason's mind raced through the implications. His own people at Harwood Technologies knew about his regular drives on that mountain highway. They had access to his schedule, his routines, even his parking space at the Denver office. Someone had taken Marcus's plan for redemption and twisted it into an assassination attempt. "Do you know who?" Jason asked. Sarah shook her head. My father suspected your board of directors might try something like this eventually. He documented some unusual financial activities, shell companies, overseas accounts, stock transactions that looked like insider trading. But he died before he could investigate further. The storm that had been threatening all evening finally broke, sending the first fat raindrops spattering against the memorial stones. Sarah pulled a tarp from her pack and quickly erected a simple shelter, her movements efficient and practiced. "We should get back to the cabin," she said. "There's more you need to see, and this storm is going to be worse than the last one." As they made their way down the trail in the gathering darkness, Charlie leading the way with sure instincts, Jason found himself grappling with a new level of complexity in his situation. Marcus's plan for redemption had been co-opted by someone who wanted him dead, which meant that his survival was even more precarious than he'd realized. "Why are you helping me now?" Jason asked as they reached the cabin. "If you believe your father's plan was the right approach, why not just walk away and let me figure it out on my own?" Sarah paused at the cabin door, her hand on the latch. "Because someone murdered my father by denying him the chance to see his plan succeed. They turned his final act of compassion into a cover for their own greed. That makes them my enemy as much as yours." Inside the warm cabin, as rain hammered the roof and wind howled through the pines, Sarah spread out the contents of the envelope on the kitchen table. The documents told a story of systematic corruption that went beyond anything Jason had imagined. Not just his own ruthless business practices, but evidence of criminal activity by his senior executives. "Your CFO has been embezzling company funds for years," Sarah explained, pointing to bank records and financial statements. "Your head of acquisitions has been taking kickbacks from target companies, and your board chair has been using inside information to trade stocks ahead of major announcements." Jason stared at the evidence in disbelief. He'd built his company on ruthless but legal business practices, only to discover that his trusted executives had been engaging in outright criminal behavior under his nose. "They've been planning to remove you for months," Sarah continued. "Your disappearance just gave them the excuse they needed to accelerate their timeline. By the time you surface, they'll have consolidated control and position themselves to claim you were emotionally unstable, possibly suicidal." The irony was perfect in its cruelty. Jason had spent his career betraying others, only to be betrayed by the very people he trusted to help him maintain power. Marcus's intervention had saved him from more than just the car crash it had revealed the conspiracy that would have destroyed him even if he'd survived. Charlie settled between Jason and Sarah, his presence a reminder that loyalty and love could exist even in the darkest circumstances. Looking at the evidence spread across the table, Jason began to understand that his path to redemption would require more than just personal transformation. It would demand that he find the courage to trust others despite having been betrayed by those closest to him. The storm lasted 2 days, trapping Jason and Sarah in the cabin with nothing but Marcus's research files and their own complicated history. Sarah had brought additional supplies from town fresh food, medical supplies, and most importantly, a satellite communication device that would allow them to monitor developments at Harwood Technologies without revealing Jason's location. What they discovered was worse than either had anticipated. Jason's board of directors had moved with ruthless efficiency, using his absence to declare him mentally incompetent and transfer operational control to the CFO, Richard Vance. The company's stock price had stabilized after the initial panic, suggesting that investors approved of the leadership change. "They're using your own playbook against you," Sarah observed as they reviewed financial news reports on her laptop. "Create a crisis, exploit the chaos, consolidate power. It's exactly what you did to my father and dozens of others." Jason couldn't deny the parallel. He'd perfected the strategy of using temporary weakness to engineer permanent power transfers. Now he was experiencing it from the victim's perspective, and the helplessness was almost unbearable. But Sarah's presence was changing the dynamic in ways Jason hadn't expected. Despite her obvious anger about her father's death and Jason's role in the family's destruction, she demonstrated a competence and strategic thinking that reminded him of Marcus in their early partnership days. She understood both the technical and business sides of the situation, and her mechanical expertise had been crucial in identifying the second sabotage of Jason's brake system. "We need to document everything," Sarah said as she organized the evidence they'd discovered. "Not just the financial crimes, but the murder conspiracy. Someone wanted you dead, and they're now positioned to benefit from your disappearance." Jason watched her work, struck by the irony that Marcus's daughter possessed exactly the combination of technical skill and business acumen that had made their original partnership so successful. She had her father's brilliance, but tempered with a pragmatism that Marcus had sometimes lacked. "Your father wrote in his journal that he hoped I could learn to trust people, despite the risk of betrayal," Jason said. "But trusting you feels like the biggest risk I've ever taken." Sarah looked up from her laptop, her expression unreadable. "Why?" "Because you have every reason to want me destroyed. Your father's plan gave you the perfect opportunity to finish what the brake sabotage started. No one would ever suspect you of deliberately leading me deeper into the wilderness where I'd never be found." "The thought crossed my mind," Sarah admitted, "especially during those first few days when Charlie was sending me updates about your progress." Jason blinked in surprise. "Updates?" Sarah smiled for the first time since they'd met, an expression that transformed her face and reminded Jason powerfully of Marcus. "You didn't think Charlie was just a regular dog, did you? Dad spent 2 years training him for this mission. The GPS tracker in his collar has been sending location data to my phone the entire time." She showed Jason her phone screen, where a map displayed Charlie's movements over the past 2 weeks. The pattern was clear, deliberate routes to specific locations, extended stays at the cabin and workshop, and now their current position at the memorial overlook. "Charlie's been reporting on me," Jason said, not sure whether to be impressed or unnerved. "Dad wanted to make sure you were actually engaging with the materials he'd left, not just waiting for rescue," Sarah explained. "Charlie was trained to recognize certain behaviors reading files, sitting quietly for extended periods, signs of genuine emotional distress versus just frustration." Jason looked at Charlie, who was lying by the fireplace, but watching the conversation with alert interest. The dog's intelligence had been obvious from the beginning, but this level of training suggested a sophistication that bordered on the supernatural. "What else did your father train him to do?" "Charlie knows the location of every evidence cache, every supply depot, and every escape route in a 50-mile radius," Sarah said. "He's also trained to recognize specific people, not just you and me, but several others who might come looking for you." The implications were staggering. Marcus had created not just a plan for Jason's redemption, but a comprehensive security protocol to protect that plan from interference. Charlie wasn't just a guide. He was a guardian, capable of leading Jason to safety or hiding him from threats, as circumstances required. "There's something else," Sarah continued, her voice becoming more serious. "Dad's plan didn't end with your personal transformation. He wanted you to have the tools and motivation to expose the corruption in your own company, but he also wanted you to make direct amends to the people you'd wronged." She pulled out another file, this one containing current addresses and contact information for dozens of Jason's former victims. Sarah Martinez was working as a school counselor in Phoenix, having given up on business entirely. Rebecca Collins was teaching high school math in rural Montana, her engineering career destroyed by Jason's patent challenges. David Brennan was facing bankruptcy as his company crumbled under the systematic assault that Jason had initiated before his disappearance. Dad believed that redemption required action, not just understanding, Sarah said. He wanted you to personally contact each person you'd harmed, to acknowledge what you'd done and offer whatever restitution was possible. The thought terrified Jason more than the physical dangers of the wilderness. Facing his own mortality in a car crash was one thing, facing the human consequences of his choices was something else entirely. What if they don't want my apologies? What if they just want me to leave them alone? Then you respect their wishes, Sarah said simply. But you have to offer the opportunity. Some of these people have been carrying anger and confusion for years, wondering why their lives were destroyed and whether they did something to deserve it. Your acknowledgement might not heal all the damage, but it could provide closure. Jason spent the evening reading through the victim files, each one a reminder of lives disrupted by his ambition. The cumulative weight of so much human suffering was overwhelming, but Sarah's presence made it bearable in ways he couldn't fully explain. She had every reason to hate him, but she was choosing to help him navigate her father's complex plan for redemption. Her decision to trust him, even conditionally, was teaching him something about forgiveness that he'd never understood before. "Why are you really doing this?" Jason asked as they prepared for bed in the cabin's small bedrooms. "It's not just about exposing the people who corrupted your father's plan." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, stroking Charlie's head as the dog settled beside her chair. "Because I want to believe that people can change. My father died believing in the possibility of your redemption, and I owe it to his memory to see if he was right. But mostly because Charlie believes in you, and Charlie was the best judge of character Dad ever knew." The golden retriever's tail thumped against the floor at the mention of his name, and Jason found himself looking into those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to hold depths of understanding beyond normal canine comprehension. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to weaken, but Jason knew the real tempest was just beginning. Tomorrow, he would have to decide whether to return to civilization and face the corporate conspiracy that wanted him dead, or continue hiding in the wilderness while his life's work was systematically dismantled by people he trusted. Either choice would require a level of courage and vulnerability that the old Jason Harwood had never possessed. But perhaps, with Charlie's guidance and Sarah's reluctant partnership, he could find the strength to become the man Marcus had always believed he could be. On the morning of Jason's 14th day in the mountains, Sarah's satellite device picked up an emergency news bulletin that changed everything. Richard Vance, Jason's CFO and the man now running Harwood Technologies, had been found dead in his Denver office, apparently from a heart attack. The timing was suspicious, just hours before a scheduled board meeting where Vance was expected to formalize his permanent appointment as CEO. "This isn't a coincidence," Sarah said, studying the news report on her laptop. "Someone's eliminating potential witnesses to the conspiracy." Jason stared at the screen, his mind racing through the implications. Vance had been the primary architect of the financial crimes documented in Marcus's files. His sudden death removed not just a witness, but the person most capable of explaining the complex embezzlement schemes that had been draining company resources for years. "If they killed Vance to cover their tracks, that means they know about the evidence your father collected," Jason said. "Which means they know about you." Sarah had already reached the same conclusion. She was packing her equipment with quick, efficient movements that spoke to military or emergency response training. "We need to get out of here immediately. If they've connected me to Dad's investigation, this location is compromised." Charlie sensed the urgency and was already at the door, his body language alert and focused. But instead of heading toward the main trail that led back to civilization, the dog moved toward the less obvious path that Jason had learned led to the workshop and deeper into the wilderness. "Charlie's right," Sarah said, following the dog's lead. "We can't go back the way we came." There are secondary routes that Dad prepared for exactly this scenario. As they made their way through the forest, Sarah explained what Jason was only beginning to understand. Marcus's plan had included multiple contingencies for different types of interference. The peaceful redemption scenario they'd been following was only one option. If outside forces threatened the process, Charlie and Sarah were prepared to implement more aggressive protective measures. Dad knew that exposing your company's corruption might trigger violent responses from people with a lot to lose, Sarah said as they hiked. He prepared safe houses, escape routes, even false identities if necessary. They reached the workshop as Sarah's phone buzzed with an urgent message. Her face went pale as she read it. "What is it?" Jason asked. "My supervisor at the auto shop. Federal agents showed up this morning, asking questions about you, about your car, about any work I might have done on BMW brake systems. Someone's connecting the dots." The workshop suddenly felt like a trap rather than a refuge. If federal investigators were looking into the brake sabotage, it was only a matter of time before they traced the evidence back to this location. But Sarah moved to a bank of equipment Jason hadn't noticed before: sophisticated computers and communication devices that looked more military than civilian. "This is Dad's real insurance policy," she said, powering up the systems. "He didn't just document your company's crimes. He documented the crimes of everyone connected to them. Board members, major clients, government officials who looked the other way. It's all here." The screens came alive with data that made Jason's head spin. Financial networks, corporate structures, political connections. Marcus had mapped an entire ecosystem of corruption that extended far beyond Harwood Technologies. Jason's company was just one node in a network of illegal activities that reached into Fortune 500 companies and government agencies. "Your father was investigating all of this?" Jason asked in amazement. "Dad was a better hacker than most people realized," Sarah said with pride. "The cancer gave him time to develop skills he'd never needed as a legitimate businessman. He used his technical background to trace money flows, communication patterns, even personal relationships between corrupt actors." She pulled up a file that showed Jason's board of directors in a new light. They weren't just embezzling from Harwood Technologies. They were part of a larger conspiracy that involved defense contracts, foreign investments, and systematic corporate espionage. The brake sabotage and Vance's murder were just the latest moves in a game that had been running for years. "They wanted you dead because you were becoming a liability," Sarah explained. "Your aggressive acquisition tactics were attracting too much attention from regulators. Better to eliminate you and blame your death on psychological instability than risk exposure of their broader operations." Charlie balked sharply, his attention focused on something outside the workshop. Sarah immediately moved to a window, scanning the forest with the intensity of someone trained in tactical awareness. "We've got company," she said quietly. 3 vehicles coming up the main access road. Professional drivers, coordinated approach. These aren't federal agents. Jason's blood ran cold. Corporate security? Worse. These look like the kind of people who make problems disappear permanently. Sarah was already shutting down the computer systems and grabbing essential equipment. "There's an emergency protocol Dad set up for this scenario. Charlie knows where to take us, but we need to move now." As they prepared to evacuate the workshop, Jason realized that his understanding of the situation had been fundamentally wrong. Marcus's plan wasn't just about personal redemption. It was about exposing and dismantling a criminal conspiracy that threatened far more than just Jason's victims. His former partner had died not just seeking to save Jason's soul, but to protect innocent people from a network of predators who used legitimate businesses as cover for systematic corruption. "The evidence your father collected is not just about me, is it?" Jason asked as they followed Charlie toward a concealed exit. "You were the entry point," Sarah admitted. "Dad started investigating your business practices out of personal hurt and anger. But the deeper he dug, the more he realized that your ruthlessness had made you a useful tool for people with much darker agendas. They've been using Harwood technologies as a front for activities that make your hostile takeovers look like innocent business competition. The sound of vehicles grew closer, and Jason could hear voices coordinating through radio communications. These weren't investigators, they were hunters, and Jason and Sarah were the prey. Charlie led them to what appeared to be solid rock face, but Sarah knew exactly where to push to reveal a concealed passage. The hidden route had been carved out of natural cave formations, probably by Marcus during his years of preparation. "How long did your father spend planning all of this?" Jason asked as they made their way through the narrow tunnel. 5 years of preliminary research, then 2 years of intensive preparation once he got his diagnosis, Sarah said. He knew he was running out of time, but he also knew that this conspiracy would continue destroying lives long after he was gone. Saving you was just the first step in a much larger operation. They emerged from the tunnel into a second concealed facility that made the workshop look primitive. This was Marcus's true command center: computers, communications equipment, document storage, and enough supplies to support several people for months. The scale of preparation was staggering, suggesting resources and connections that went far beyond what a dying cancer patient should have been able to assemble. "Sarah," Jason said slowly, "who was your father really working with?" This level of preparation, these resources, he couldn't have done this alone. Sarah's expression became guarded as she activated the facility's security systems. Dad had friends in places that might surprise you. People who'd been watching the same criminal networks from different angles, waiting for the right opportunity to act. The implication hit Jason like a physical blow. "Government agents. Your father was working with federal law enforcement." "Not exactly working with," Sarah corrected. "More like providing information to people who couldn't officially acknowledge the source." Dad's evidence was too valuable to ignore, but it was obtained through methods that wouldn't hold up in court. They needed someone inside the conspiracy to corroborate the findings. Jason stared at her as the final piece of Marcus's plan became clear. Someone inside the conspiracy. Someone like me. Sarah nodded grimly. Dad didn't just want to redeem you personally. He wanted to position you to help bring down the entire network. Your testimony, combined with his evidence, could expose corruption that reaches into dozens of major corporations and government agencies. Charlie settled beside Jason, offering comfort that felt more necessary than ever. The simple story of personal redemption had become something far more complex and dangerous. Marcus hadn't just saved Jason from a car crash. He'd recruited him for a mission that could cost him his life, but might save countless others from the predators who'd been using his company as a front for their crimes. Outside the concealed facility, Jason could hear the sound of systematic searching as their pursuers worked their way through the forest. The final test of Marcus's plan was beginning, and Jason would have to choose between the safe selfishness that had defined his old life and the dangerous courage that his transformation demanded. The hidden facility's security monitors showed 6 armed men systematically searching the forest around the workshop. They moved with military precision, using hand signals and coordinated sweeps that suggested extensive tactical training. These weren't corporate security guards. They were professional operatives sent to eliminate witnesses to crimes that reached far beyond simple embezzlement. "They'll find the workshop within the hour," Sarah said, monitoring their progress on multiple camera feeds. "But they won't find this location. Dad spent 3 years building this place, using natural cave formations and electromagnetic shielding that makes it invisible to most detection equipment." Jason watched the searchers with a mixture of fear and fascination. 2 weeks ago, he'd been the kind of person who hired such men to solve problems that couldn't be addressed through legal channels. Now he was their target, experiencing the terror that his own victims must have felt when his intimidation tactics escalated beyond mere business pressure. "How long can we stay hidden here?" he asked. "Indefinitely, if necessary," Sarah replied. "Dad stocked this place for a 6-month siege. But hiding isn't the endgame. It's just buying us time to coordinate with the people who can actually stop this conspiracy." She activated a secure communication system that connected them to what appeared to be a federal operations center. Jason recognized the setup from classified government contracts he'd worked on in Harwood Technology's early days, when they'd provided cybersecurity services to intelligence agencies. "Sierra Base, this is Mountain View." Sarah spoke into the encrypted radio. "Package is secure, but we have active hunters in the area. Request immediate extraction and protection protocols." The response came back immediately. "Mountain View, this is Agent Torres. Extraction team is en route to your location. Estimated arrival 4 hours. Can you maintain position until then?" "Affirmative. Package is ready for debriefing and testimony." Jason stared at Sarah in amazement. "You're a federal agent." "I'm a lot of things," Sarah said, with a smile that reminded him powerfully of Marcus. "Mechanical engineer, federal informant, and my father's daughter. Dad recruited me to help with this operation 2 years ago when he realized the scope of what he'd uncovered." The revelation recontextualized everything Jason thought he understood about his situation. Marcus hadn't just planned a personal intervention. He'd orchestrated a federal law enforcement operation using his own death and Jason's redemption as cover for gathering evidence against a vast criminal conspiracy. "The brake sabotage, my rescue, everything, it was all part of an official investigation." "Semi-official," Sarah corrected. "Dad's evidence couldn't be used in court because it was obtained through illegal hacking, but it provided roadmaps that allowed legitimate investigations to develop parallel evidence. Your testimony about the conspiracy within your own company would corroborate findings that federal agents have been developing through other channels." Charlie had been monitoring the security feeds with the same intensity as his human companions. But now he moved to a different console and began manipulating controls with his nose and paws. Jason watched in amazement as the dog activated additional camera feeds, showing escape routes and alternative positions throughout the mountain facility. "How is he doing that?" Jason asked. "Dad spent 18 months training Charlie on every system in this facility," Sarah explained. "Dogs are actually excellent at pattern recognition and following complex protocols. Charlie knows this operation better than most human agents would." The sophistication of Marcus's plan was staggering in its scope and preparation. He'd anticipated not just Jason's psychological transformation, but every possible interference from the criminal conspiracy they were working to expose. Even his death had been incorporated into the operational timeline, with Sarah and Charlie prepared to complete the mission if necessary. "What exactly are you expecting me to testify about?" Jason asked. "I knew my executives were ruthless, but I had no idea they were involved in anything criminal." Sarah pulled up files on the facility's main computer, displaying the evidence that Marcus had gathered over years of investigation. The financial crimes Jason had discovered were just the tip of an iceberg that included defense contract fraud, foreign intelligence operations, and systematic corruption of regulatory agencies. "Your company has been laundering money for foreign criminal organizations," Sarah explained. "Those aggressive acquisitions you thought were just ruthless business practices? Many of them were designed to give the conspiracy control over critical cybersecurity infrastructure. They've been selling access to American corporate and government systems to hostile foreign governments." The implications made Jason's stomach clench with nausea. He'd been a traitor without knowing it, his ambition and moral blindness exploited by people who viewed him as a useful tool rather than a trusted partner. "The board members who tried to have me killed, they're foreign agents? Some of them," Others are just criminals who got in too deep to back out. Your CFO was probably killed because he was developing a conscience about the treason charges he'd face if the operation was exposed. Jason thought about Richard Vance, a man he'd worked with for 8 years without really knowing. Vance had always been ambitious and morally flexible, but Jason had never suspected him of betraying his own country. The revelation that Jason's own leadership had enabled such treachery was almost unbearable. How many people have been hurt because of what my company was being used for? Sarah's expression softened slightly. Dad estimated that the conspiracy's activities had compromised the personal information of over 50 million Americans, facilitated industrial espionage that cost the economy billions of dollars, and potentially compromised national security operations that put American lives at risk. The scale of harm was so vast that Jason couldn't fully process it. His personal victims, the businesses he'd destroyed and lives he'd ruined, represented just a fraction of the damage enabled by his moral blindness and ruthless ambition. Charlie, suddenly alerted, his attention focused on the security monitors. The searchers had found the workshop and were beginning to examine the equipment that Marcus and Sarah had left behind. One of them was speaking into a radio, probably reporting their discovery to whoever had sent them. "They'll realize we were here recently," Sarah said. "That might accelerate their search pattern, but it also means they'll be more focused on the immediate area and less likely to detect the federal extraction team." As if summoned by her words, new movement appeared on the perimeter cameras. 4 figures in tactical gear moving through the forest with the same professional competence as the hunters, but approaching from a different direction. The federal agents were arriving ahead of schedule. "Sierra Base, this is Agent Torres. We have eyes on the target location and confirm hostile presence. Recommend immediate extraction before engagement." Sarah was already packing essential evidence and equipment into portable cases. Mountain View copies. Package is ready for extraction. Requesting escort to safe house for extended debriefing. Jason found himself moving with purpose for the first time in weeks. The passive acceptance of Marcus's plan was giving way to active participation in bringing down the conspiracy that had corrupted his life's work. The transformation his former partner had envisioned was complete. Jason was no longer the ruthless CEO who'd prioritize profits over people, but he wasn't yet the person he might become. "There's one more thing," Sarah said as they prepared to leave the facility. "Dad left specific instructions about what should happen after your testimony helps convict the conspirators. He wanted you to have the choice of rebuilding Harwood Technologies as a legitimate company, using the resources you've accumulated to make amends to your victims. And if I choose not to rebuild, then the company's assets would be liquidated and distributed to the people and organizations you've harmed over the years. Either way, Dad wanted to ensure that your wealth and influence were used to heal rather than harm." Charlie moved to the facility's exit, his body language indicating readiness for the next phase of their journey. Jason looked around the command center that Marcus had built as his final gift to the world, a place where truth could be preserved and justice could be planned, even when powerful forces aligned against both. The Golden Retriever's eyes met. His and Jason saw in them not just Marcus's love and forgiveness, but a challenge to prove worthy of the second chance he'd been given. The extraction team was waiting outside, ready to escort him back to a world where his testimony could save lives and his choices could define the man he would become for whatever time remained to him. For the first time in his adult life, Jason Harwood was ready to choose courage over comfort, justice over profit, and redemption over revenge. Marcus's plan had succeeded beyond even his dying hopes, not just saving Jason's soul, but positioning him to save others from the predators who'd exploited his moral blindness for so long. The extraction went wrong from the beginning. As Jason, Sarah, and Charlie emerged from the hidden facility, The federal agents who were supposed to escort them to safety opened fire on the searchers below. What should have been a quiet evacuation became a running battle through the Colorado wilderness. "Stay low and follow Charlie," Agent Torres shouted over the gunfire. "The conspirators have more resources than we anticipated." Charlie moved with the confidence of an animal who'd been trained for exactly this scenario, leading them along a route that avoided both the hostile searchers and the tactical engagement below. But Jason could hear radio chatter from multiple groups. The six-man search team they'd been monitoring was only the advance element of a much larger operation. "How many people did they send after us?" Jason asked as they crouched behind a granite outcropping. "Too many," Sarah replied grimly. "Dad's contingency plans assumed we'd be dealing with corporate security, maybe a few hired mercenaries. This feels like military-level opposition." Agent Torres was coordinating with his team through encrypted communications, his expression growing more concerned with each report. "We've got helicopters inbound from the south, ground teams approaching from 3 directions, and what looks like electronic warfare equipment jamming our normal communication channels." The scope of the response suggested that Jason's testimony posed an even greater threat to the conspiracy than Marcus had realized. These people weren't just trying to silence a witness. They were conducting a military operation to eliminate everyone connected to the investigation. Charlie led them to a position where they could observe the tactical situation without being detected. Below in the valley, Jason counted at least 20 armed operatives coordinating their search patterns with professional efficiency. This wasn't corporate damage control. It was a war. "Sierra Base, this is Torres." The agent spoke into his radio. "We need immediate backup and air support. The opposition has escalated beyond our prepared response level." The reply was crackling with static. "Torres, this is Base. Air support is compromised. They've got surface-to-air capabilities we didn't anticipate. You're on your own until we can coordinate a larger response." Sarah was studying the tactical display on her portable equipment, tracking the movement of hostile forces through the facility's remaining sensors. "They're setting up a containment perimeter. This isn't just about stopping our extraction. They want to eliminate everyone who knows about the evidence." Jason realized that his decision to trust Marcus's plan had put not just his own life at risk, but the lives of federal agents and Sarah herself. The conspiracy's response suggested that his testimony could expose criminal activities far beyond what anyone had anticipated. "What if I surrender?" Jason asked. "If I'm what they want, maybe they'll let the rest of you go." "You're not what they want," Agent Torres said flatly. "You're what they're afraid of. Your testimony could unravel operations that involve billions of dollars and dozens of high-level conspirators. They'd rather start a war than let you reach a courtroom." Charlie suddenly alerted, his attention focused on something beyond their current position. The dog moved with urgent purpose toward a section of forest that appeared identical to everything around it. But Jason had learned to trust the animal's superior senses and training. "Charlie's detected something," Sarah said, following the golden retriever. "Dad trained him to recognize not just human threats, but electronic signatures from surveillance equipment. They found the source of Charlie's concern, a sophisticated listening post hidden among the trees, bristling with antennas and monitoring equipment. The setup was temporary, but professional, suggesting that the conspiracy had been tracking federal communications and Marcus's facility for some time. "They've been watching us for weeks," Sarah said, examining the equipment with professional interest. "This explains how they knew to intercept the extraction team." Agent Torres was already working to disable the surveillance post, but the damage was done. The conspiracy had been monitoring their communications, tracking their movements, and preparing countermeasures for every aspect of Marcus's plan. "We need to assume they know everything," Torres said. "All safe houses, all backup protocols, all extraction routes. We're operating without any operational security." Jason felt the weight of responsibility settling over him like a physical burden. Marcus's carefully constructed plan was collapsing because the conspiracy possessed resources and reach that exceeded even his paranoid preparations. The redemption story was becoming a tragedy that would consume everyone who tried to help him. But Charlie had other ideas. The golden retriever was examining the surveillance equipment with intense concentration, then moved to a specific piece of hardware and began manipulating controls with his nose and paws. Within minutes, the monitoring station's displays were showing different information false data that would misdirect the conspiracy's tactical coordination. How was he doing that? Torres asked in amazement. Dad taught Charlie to recognize and manipulate electronic systems, Sarah explained. Dogs are actually excellent at following complex protocols. And Charlie spent 2 years learning every piece of equipment that might be relevant to this operation. The dog's technical sabotage bought them precious time, but Jason could hear helicopters approaching from multiple directions. The conspiracy's response was escalating beyond anything that local federal agents could handle. They were facing an enemy with seemingly unlimited resources and no concern about collateral damage. There's something else, Sarah said, monitoring communications through the hijacked surveillance post. They're not just trying to stop your testimony. They're planning to eliminate everyone who might corroborate it. The other business leaders you've worked with, federal agents who've been investigating parallel crimes, even some of your own employees who might have witnessed suspicious activities. The revelation made Jason's blood run cold. His transformation from victim to witness had triggered a wave of violence that would claim innocent lives across the country. The conspiracy was using his potential testimony as justification for a systematic elimination of threats. How do we stop this? He asked. Agent Torres was coordinating with his remaining team members, but their options were limited. We can't stop it by running. The only way to end this is to get your testimony on record before they can eliminate all the witnesses and evidence. But you said the extraction was compromised. The planned extraction, yes. But there are emergency protocols that even Marcus didn't know about. Federal prosecutors have been preparing for exactly this scenario, a situation where the conspiracy would escalate to open violence to protect itself. Sarah was monitoring multiple communication channels through the captured equipment, her expression growing more concerned with each report she intercepted. They're moving assets nationwide. Safe houses in Denver, Washington, and Miami are all under surveillance. This operation reaches far beyond Colorado. Charlie barked sharply, his attention focused on new movement in the forest below. Additional vehicles were arriving at the main access road, but these appeared to be civilian rather than tactical. Jason could see news vans and what looked like local law enforcement responding to reports of gunfire in the national forest. Media attention, Torres said with the first smile Jason had seen from him. That's something the conspiracy can't control as easily as federal operations. They can intimidate or eliminate law enforcement and government agents, but they can't stop news coverage without creating even bigger problems. The tactical situation was shifting in ways that neither side had anticipated. What had begun as a covert extraction was becoming a public confrontation that would be difficult for the conspiracy to contain or explain. We need to get Jason to those news crews, Sarah said. If he makes his initial testimony public, it becomes much harder for the conspiracy to suppress the investigation. But reaching the media would require getting past the armed operatives who controlled the perimeter around the facility. Charlie was studying the tactical situation with the same intensity he'd shown for every other aspect of the operation, and Jason found himself wondering what solutions Marcus's training might have prepared the dog to implement. The golden retriever's eyes met his, and Jason saw in them not just intelligence but determination. Whatever happened next, Charlie would see Marcus's plan through to completion. even if that meant adapting it to circumstances that his master could never have anticipated. Charlie's solution was typically elegant in its simplicity. The dog led them not toward the media crews below, but to a communications array that Marcus had hidden on the highest ridge overlooking the facility. From this position, they could broadcast directly to multiple networks simultaneously, bypassing the conspiracy's attempts to control information flow. "Dad's final contingency," Sarah said as she activated the broadcasting equipment. If everything else failed, he wanted to ensure that the truth would reach the public regardless of who tried to stop it. Agent Torres was providing security while Jason prepared to make the most important statement of his life. Below them, the tactical situation had deteriorated into chaos as conspiracy operatives tried to contain both federal agents and increasing numbers of media personnel and local authorities. "Remember," Torres said, "once you start broadcasting, there's no going back. The conspiracy will have no choice but to escalate their response, but they also won't be able to suppress your testimony." Jason looked out over the Colorado wilderness, where he'd spent the past 2 weeks discovering who he really was and who he might become. Charlie sat beside him, patient and supportive, ready to complete the mission that Marcus had entrusted to him. "Testing, testing," Sarah said into the broadcasting equipment. "This is an emergency transmission from the Colorado National Forest. We are broadcasting evidence of a conspiracy involving corporate espionage, murder, and treason." The response was immediate. News networks began picking up the signal, and Jason could see increased activity from the media crews below as they realized they were receiving an exclusive story that would reshape American understanding of corporate crime. "My name is Jason Harwood," Jason said, his voice steadying as he began to speak. "I am the CEO of Harwood Technologies, and I have been the target of an assassination attempt because my testimony threatens to expose criminal activities that reach into dozens of major corporations and government agencies." He detailed everything: the brake sabotage, Richard Vance's murder, the evidence of embezzlement and foreign espionage that Marcus had uncovered. With each revelation, Jason could see the media response intensifying below as reporters realized they were witnessing the exposure of one of the largest criminal conspiracies in American corporate history. "The man who saved my life was Marcus Webb, my former business partner, whom I betrayed 15 years ago. He spent his final years documenting these crimes and creating a plan to ensure that justice would prevail even after his death. He died believing that redemption was possible for anyone, even someone like me who had lost his way completely." Charlie pressed closer to Jason as he spoke, offering comfort and encouragement. The dog's presence was a reminder that Marcus's love and forgiveness extended beyond death, that the plan they were completing was motivated not by revenge, but by hope for a better world. Sarah was monitoring multiple communication channels, tracking the conspiracy's response to the broadcast. "They're pulling back their tactical teams," she reported. "Too much media attention now. They can't risk being captured on camera." But the conspiracy's retreat didn't mean the danger was over. Jason could see helicopters circling at a distance, and Torres reported that federal agencies across the country were conducting simultaneous raids based on the evidence Jason was providing. "This broadcast is being recorded and transmitted to federal prosecutors, congressional investigators, and international law enforcement agencies," Jason continued. "The evidence supporting these allegations has been preserved in multiple locations and cannot be suppressed through intimidation or violence." As Jason finished his testimony, he realized that Marcus's plan had succeeded beyond even his former partner's wildest hopes. Not only had Jason been transformed from a ruthless executive into someone capable of sacrificing his own safety for justice, but he had become the catalyst for exposing corruption that threatened national security itself. "There's one more thing," Jason said, looking directly into the camera. To all the people whose lives I destroyed in my climb to power, Sarah Martinez, Rebecca Collins, David Brennan, and dozens of others, I know my apology cannot undo the harm I caused, but I promise to spend whatever time I have left making amends for my actions. Charlie barked once, a sound that seemed to convey approval and completion. The dog's mission was finished. He had guided Jason through Marcus's elaborate plan for redemption and positioned him to help heal some of the damage that corporate greed and moral blindness had inflicted on innocent people. Sarah was coordinating with federal agents who were finally able to approach their position safely. "It's over," she said with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "The broadcast worked. They can't suppress this story now." Agent Torres confirmed that conspiracy members were surrendering or being arrested across multiple states. The evidence that Marcus had gathered, combined with Jason's testimony, had provided the foundation for the largest corporate crime investigation in decades. "What happens now?" Jason asked as they prepared to descend from the ridge. "Now you keep your promise to make amends," Sarah said simply. Dad's plan didn't end with exposing the conspiracy. It included detailed recommendations for how you could use your resources to help the people you've harmed. As they made their way down the mountain, Charlie leading the procession with the confidence of a mission accomplished, Jason reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this moment. 2 weeks ago, he had been a man so lost in ambition and ruthlessness that he'd forgotten his own humanity. Now, he was someone who had chosen justice over safety, redemption over revenge, and hope over cynicism. The golden retriever looked back at him with those intelligent brown eyes, and Jason saw in them not just Marcus's love, but the possibility of a future defined by healing rather than harm. The transformation was complete, but the work of redemption was just beginning. 6 months later, Jason stood before Marcus Webb's grave on a crisp autumn morning in Colorado. Charlie beside him as always. The memorial service had drawn dozens of people whose lives had been touched by Marcus's extraordinary plan for redemption. Federal agents whose investigations had been made possible by his evidence. Business leaders who'd been saved from the conspiracy's predation. And former victims of Jason's ruthlessness who'd found healing through his direct apologies and restitution. The corporate conspiracy trials had dominated headlines for months, resulting in convictions that reached from corporate boardrooms to foreign intelligence agencies. Harwood Technologies had been restructured as an employee-owned cooperative dedicated to ethical cybersecurity practices, its profits directed toward supporting small businesses and educational programs rather than enriching shareholders. "He would have been proud of what you've accomplished," Sarah said, joining Jason at the graveside. She'd accepted his offer to become the company's chief ethics officer, a position that Marcus would have appreciated for its irony and its necessity. Jason had spent the past months personally visiting everyone he'd wronged, offering apologies that were sometimes accepted and sometimes rejected, but always sincere. Rebecca Collins had returned to engineering, using a scholarship fund Jason had established to complete her advanced degree. Sarah Martinez had started a new consulting firm with Jason's backing, specializing in helping small businesses navigate competitive pressures ethically. David Brennan's company had not only survived, but thrived once the conspiracy's attacks ceased, and he'd become one of Jason's strongest advocates in the business community. "People can change," Brennan had told a congressional hearing on corporate ethics. Jason Harwood is living proof that redemption is possible even for those who seem completely lost. Charlie had become something of a celebrity, his role in exposing the conspiracy making him a symbol of loyalty and courage. But the golden retriever seemed most content during quiet moments like this, when he could simply be a beloved companion rather than a hero. "I've been thinking about Marcus's final journal entry," Jason said, pulling out a woolen notebook that had become his most treasured possession. "He wrote that he hoped I would choose hope over cynicism, Trust over suspicion. I think I'm finally beginning to understand what he meant. The business world that Jason now inhabited was radically different from the ruthless environment he'd once dominated. Harwood Technology's cooperative model had inspired similar transformations at other companies, creating a movement towards stakeholder capitalism that prioritized social benefit alongside financial success. But the most profound changes were personal. Jason's relationships with employees, business partners, and even competitors were built on transparency and mutual respect rather than manipulation and intimidation. The isolation that had characterized his old life had given way to genuine connections with people who valued his transformation. "There's something else," Sarah said, her voice carrying the excitement of good news. "The Golden Retriever Rescue Foundation we established in Dad's name just placed its 100th dog with families in need. And the scholarship program for children of small business owners has funded its first graduating class." Jason smiled, remembering Marcus's belief that redemption required action, not just understanding. Every dog rescued, every scholarship awarded, every small business supported represented a life touched by the love that had motivated Marcus's elaborate plan. Charlie barked softly, his attention focused on something approaching through the cemetery. Jason turned to see a young couple with 2 small children, the man carrying flowers and moving with the careful dignity of someone paying respects to a fallen hero. "That's Agent Rodriguez and his family," Sarah explained. "His investigation into defense contract fraud was made possible by Dad's evidence. His children call Charlie Uncle Dog because they've heard so many stories about his role in the operation." As the family approached, Charlie's tail wagged with the enthusiasm he reserved for people he genuinely liked. The children ran to embrace the Golden Retriever, their laughter filling the quiet cemetery with joy that seemed to honor Marcus's memory better than any formal ceremony. "Mr. Harwood," Agent Rodriguez said, extending his hand, "I wanted to thank you again for your testimony. The convictions we secured have prevented crimes that could have compromised national security for decades." Jason accepted the handshake, still amazed by how different it felt to be recognized for helping rather than harming others. "I was just keeping a promise to an old friend." "A promise that saved a lot of lives," Rodriguez replied. "My children will grow up in a safer world because of what you and Marcus accomplished." As the Rodriguez family placed their flowers at Marcus's grave and shared their own memories of how the investigation had affected their lives, Jason reflected on the ripple effects of one man's decision to choose redemption over revenge. The conspiracy trials had revealed that Marcus's evidence had prevented not just corporate crimes, but potential terrorist attacks that would have exploited compromised cybersecurity systems. The lives saved numbered in the thousands, though the exact count would never be known. Dad always said that one person's choice to do the right thing could change everything, Sarah said as they watched the children play with Charlie among the autumn leaves. He proved that even dying didn't have to limit someone's ability to make the world better. Jason opened Marcus's journal to the final entry, words he'd memorized but still needed to read. "I hope Jason discovers that redemption isn't about erasing the past, it's about choosing a different future. I hope he learns that the love we give to others is the only wealth that truly matters. And I hope Charlie teaches him that loyalty and forgiveness can survive even the deepest betrayals." The Golden Retriever looked up at Jason with those intelligent, brown eyes that had guided him through the most important transformation of his life. In them, Jason saw not just Marcus's love, but his own potential for continuing to choose hope over cynicism, service over selfishness, and redemption over despair. As they walked back to the car, Charlie trotting contentedly beside them, Jason understood that Marcus's plan would never truly be complete. Redemption wasn't a destination, but a daily choice, a commitment to being better than his worst impulses and more generous than his fears. The sun was setting over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold that matched Charlie's coat. Jason had found his way home, not to a place, but to a purpose that honored both the man he'd been and the man he was still becoming. Marcus Webb's legacy lived on in every life, touched by the transformation he'd made possible. Every act of kindness, inspired by his example, and every moment when someone chose forgiveness over vengeance. His golden retriever had completed the most important mission of his life, guiding a lost soul back to the light and proving that even the most ruthless heart could learn to love. In the end, sometimes it really does take losing everything to discover what truly matters. And sometimes the very people we hurt become the ones who save us when we need it most. Jason Harwood had learned both lessons in the Colorado wilderness, with a golden retriever as his teacher and a dead man's love as his salvation.